Why did two space shuttles explode in flight, killing 14 astronauts? That's a question that social psychologist Adam Grant asks in his book, Think Again, published this year. In 1986, the Space Shuttle Challenger exploded. Grant says that it was because NASA knew there was a risk with the seal of the joints in the rocket boosters. That had been identified as a problem, but assumed the problem didn't need to be questioned more. In 2003, the Space Shuttle Columbia disintegrated because the foam on the wings was seen to fall off. It had been identified as a problem, but was assumed it didn't need to be questioned more. The immediate cause was technical failure, but Grant argues that human error caused the technical failure. And he examines how that kind of error happens in his book, Think Again. Grant says the problem is partly a culture where questioning the thinking and consensus of the group is not encouraged. The same kind of error can happen in university without a space shuttle blowing up. Taking courses in a university can make it easy to do well and achieve perfection in artificial circumstances. That is good because it creates a safe space to test ideas and make mistakes without getting fired. But that safe space in university also removes us from the pressures and accidents of working in the real world. Sometimes safe spaces are created by harmony, by people agreeing and cooperating, by people reaching a consensus, by people thinking like one social group. Harmony and consensus are good, but they can prevent exploring alternatives. Innovation in business and society comes from exploring alternatives. We have two types of mental faculties for exploring alternatives. One is curiosity. Curiosity is a basic human faculty for learning. Curiosity is a kind of motivation to explore knowledge. Without curiosity, you can have mental inertia. Curiosity can either be encouraged or suppressed in the education system and in society. The second mental faculty for exploring alternatives is skepticism or doubt. Skepticism can be encouraged or suppressed in the education system or society. Innovation in business and society and science can come from the faculties of curiosity and skepticism. But curiosity and skepticism can be suppressed by social harmony and by the pressure to conform and agree and not explore alternatives. So, in your education in university, are you allowed to be skeptical and explore alternatives? Or are you required to learn a dogma and conform to that dogma? Do you allow yourself to be skeptical and explore alternatives? Or do you say to yourself that you must conform to a dogma? Do you know that there is research that says the ability to ask questions declines the farther a person gets in the education system? This is a course in professional communication about looking at one aspect of that, critical thinking, and about exploring alternatives, about basing communication on evidence and valid reasoning. The first assignment in this course was a test in critical thinking. You were given a research article published in a journal. You were asked to evaluate the research article in terms of the tools of critical thinking that were explained to you. When you examined the research article, did you think you were free to question the research, or did you think you were required to agree with the research? Think about that. What were your basic assumptions about the assignment and about the research article? Did you feel free to be skeptical and to support your skepticism with evidence? Or did you think you were required to conform to the thinking of the article? One difficulty in thinking critical about the article was that it's about the Generation X, that of which most of this class is composed. And the difficulty that the article seemed to agree with conventional thinking in your generation. So, did you agree with the article because it reflects the thinking of your generation and therefore not question it and not be skeptical? Or did you allow yourself to be skeptical about the thinking of your generation? Think about it. Did you allow yourself to be curious and skeptical? Or do curiosity and skepticism seem socially unacceptable to you? Human beings are naturally curious, which is one reason why we've survived for so long. And human beings have the ability to express curiosity by asking questions. That's how we advance knowledge. That's how we have breakthroughs, which is part of the point of a book called A More Beautiful Question by Warren Berger, a business journalist who has studied innovation in business. But how do you ask questions to have breakthroughs in knowledge and create something new? We don't just ask questions to understand better what we already know. We need to ask questions about what we don't know. Warren Berger, in his book, A More Beautiful Question, believes the human mind is capable of creation and innovation. And he sees the intellectual tool of that ability being to ask creative and innovative questions. Now, not all questions are creative and innovative, but some are. And we want to think about what's a creative question, an innovative question, and what isn't. So asking the question, will it rain today, is not a creative or innovative question. Asking which way to Starbucks is not a creative or innovative question. It is a purely functional question. An innovative question would be, what if tourism is no longer a paid career? Or asking, what would happen? Is tourism necessary? What would happen if all the professional paid tourism staff disappeared? Another innovative question would be, can society function without universities? What would happen if all the universities suddenly disappeared? Warren Berger, as a journalist, does not have to do the research or provide the answers, only to ask the questions, the right questions to the right people, and then summarize and assemble the answers. His creativity is formulating the questions, finding connections and coherence in the answers, and summarize the answers in a way that creates new understanding. So, in my reading of A More Beautiful Question, the author gives us certain conditions that stifle curiosity and other conditions that promote curiosity. And if I was renaming the book, I would call it a more beautiful curiosity. We can learn about this process and dynamic of intriguing questions by reading and examining good interviewers. Now, here's the catch. Curiosity declines with age and education. Studies show that the older a person gets and the more education a person gets, the fewer questions the person asks, and the fewer questions the person asks to challenge authority or the status quo. I hate to tell you this, but studies show that university students have lost a lot of curiosity and the ability to ask questions by the time they reach university. Students learn not to ask questions that the teacher doesn't want to hear. People in an office learn not to ask questions that the boss doesn't want to hear. People in a church learn to ask questions that the religious leader doesn't want to hear. That's the essence of what Warren Berger tells us in his book. And according to the research of Harvard child psychologist Paul Harris, quote, a child asks about 40,000 questions between the ages of 2 and 5. 40,000. How many questions are you asking now? The story and the research about this is in Warren Berger's book, and he talks about more research, lab research of scans of the activation of the brain show that the connections between neurons in the brain of children are 3 times those in an adult brain. 3 times. As children get older and progress through the education system, the research says there's a steep decline in them asking questions and a decrease in their engagement with their education. This contradicts the research article that you analyzed at the beginning of the course. This contrary research says that as children become socialized in the education system, they learn not to ask questions. Their curiosity declines. And with the decline of curiosity and the decline of questions, their disengagement with the education system increases. So this book presents a totally different explanation of what causes disengagement in students. As curiosity declines, for whatever reason it is, the submission to authority and the status quo increases. People feel like they are getting smarter with an education, but their mental abilities may be shrinking, at least in terms of the crucial ability to formulate questions. And as the ability to formulate intriguing and creative questions decline, so does innovation, so does the ability to adapt, and so does the ability to change in an era like we are now experiencing, an era of constant change. Not in all people, but in a significant number of people. Do we question the status quo or simply accept the status quo without questioning? If something has always been done one way, do we assume that makes it right because it was always done that way? When he was 4 years old, Albert Einstein asked why the compass always points north. That's an intriguing question. It's one of those 40,000 questions that children can ask, the sort of question that eludes adults with a loss of curiosity. Now, we get to chapter 3 of the course text, the craft of research. When you read chapter 3, did you find it odd? Did you find it contradictory? Did you sense contradictions between chapter 3 and chapter 4? I've left chapter 3 until the end of the course for this reason. I think chapter 3 is their most radical chapter in the book. If you wanted to do an anthropological study of the academic and professional mind, chapter 3 would be a good starting point. You know what is the worst question for an instructor to hear? One question would be, do I have to read that chapter? Do I have to read the whole textbook? Are there marks for that? What if students in a class could each design their own separate assignment? The only requirement would be that it engages you in deep and meaningful analysis. And that's the last assignment in this course. There is no preferred answer in that. The only requirement is in that final assignment that you analyze the text in the most meaningful way. You make your own assignment, just make it good. In some courses, I have let the whole class vote as to how to organize a group project, with students choosing leaders in a pod or deciding if they even want a leader. In one case, I divide the class into 2 groups, with each group designing its own crisis management plan for an earthquake in Kamloops. Each group was given the initial task of deciding how to organize its group. That is an attempt to get away from the static situation of a class in a classroom. We're not in a classroom right now, we're online, and this kind of passivity and this kind of inertia that can overtake your education. So the point is, and the point of chapter 3 is, how do you be curious? How do you ask questions? For example, what if luggage had wheels? Bernard Sadow asked that question in 1970. What if luggage has wheels? Now, that's hard of us to imagine right now, because that's pretty much we see when we go through an airport. We see luggage on wheels. Think back to a time when luggage did not have wheels, and you had to carry your luggage or drag your luggage through the airport. But nobody thought to ask a question about that, to be curious why that has to be so. Bernard Sadow asked that in 1970, and as you might guess, you get him creating a company to put wheels on luggage, and now it's getting harder to find luggage that doesn't have wheels. Why do encyclopedias have to be written by experts? That might seem like a strange question now. It wasn't a strange question 15 or so years ago. And a group asked that question. Encyclopedias were written by experts, and they went into the Encyclopedia Britannica, and they were sold door to door, and you had to buy the whole set, and it had to be perfect, because you couldn't run to the bookstore every month or every year and update the books. That situation's changed now with online encyclopedias by Wikipedia that were not written by experts. However, when Wikipedia was first put on the internet, it was simply putting online the traditional process of an encyclopedia. And so initial stages of Wikipedia were written by experts, but then the people behind it started asking questions. Is there a better way to do that? Why does an encyclopedia have to be written by experts? And the answer to that question is Wikipedia. Other questions. Why can't students design and mark their own assignments? Why do you have to complete a course within a strict time limit? That's not what I do when I'm reading a book or when I'm streaming a series. What if Christ hadn't died on the cross? That's called a counterfactual question because it contradicts history, and it's a thought experiment to expand thinking and possibilities. And there's some interesting literature on counterfactuals, and counterfactuals is recommended by some psychologists as a way of breaking out of the mindset of the consensus and the status quo and conventional situation. And counterfactuals start with a question. What if Christ hadn't died on the cross? What if Mohammed never existed? What if Buddha had stayed within the palace and not decided to go out on the streets? Counterfactual questions, questions coming from curiosity, questions coming from the ability to ask questions about what nobody else has thought to ask about, such as, why can't luggage have wheels? In the 1990s, a man called Reed Hastings was frustrated. That's back in the days of video stores at Blockbuster. He was frustrated by paying late fees. And he asked a question, why do I have to pay late fees to rent a video? And what if a video rental business were run like a health club with a monthly membership and no late fees? It was an odd question. It was a question that nobody else had thought to ask, because there was a norm at that time that you went to a video store to rent a video. Nobody thought differently. Nobody thought of alternatives. That was how the business operated. That was the reality. That was the norm. Why do I have to pay late fees? The answer that Reed Hastings came up with was Netflix, which he founded in 1997. Meanwhile, Blockbuster, which was a huge chain in Canada and the United States of renting videos, was disrupted by the internet and the ability to rent films on the internet. And Blockbuster did not change and adapt. So Blockbuster folded. It couldn't change. Blockbuster could have switched to online rental, but it was stuck with inflexible thinking. Blockbuster went into bankruptcy in 2010, and the Blockbuster building in Kamloops and Sahalee is now a bank. As of April 2020, meanwhile, Netflix had over 193 million paid subscriptions worldwide. Asking questions, being flexible, being adaptable. The ability to ask a question indicates flexibility and adaptability, not just in thinking, but in ability to change your behavior. Questions can be used to exercise our minds, to change our minds, to probe the unknown, and to think of what doesn't exist but could exist. In other words, questions can be used for discovery and for innovation. And questions have played a role in history. Some questions can take hundreds of years, even thousands of years to answer. And some questions we still haven't answered over thousands of years. The quality of the question you ask produces the quality of the answer. The quality of the answer is not an accident. Before a good answer comes a good question. Thus, the question has priority. The ability to formulate questions is the route to independence in thinking, originality, and innovation. That means that independence, originality, and innovation lie in the ability to formulate essential and important questions that nobody has ever asked. Nobody else has even realized that question. Notice that I said essential and important questions. Those would be questions that are important to human life and important to human essence. It would include questions about the environment, because the environment is essential to human life. Another way of saying this is use a question to identify an important unknown. It is easy to ask a question when we know there is an answer. It is difficult to ask a question about what we don't know, about what we don't know, we don't know. To ask a question, to ask for unknown information. And that is how really innovative research starts. Innovative research starts with asking a question that other people didn't even realize was a question. And that's why I say chapter 3 is radical. That's why I've left this radical chapter until the end of the course. The other chapters in the book presume that you have a research problem given to you. Maybe your boss gives you a research problem, or maybe in the discipline you're working in, there's a question, and the group is posing the question. But chapter 3 is about asking questions that others haven't thought of asking innovative questions that lead to breakthroughs. So it's the difference in university between being given topics on an assignment, which the instructor feels are already guaranteed to be important, and designing your own assignments where you bear the responsibility for how good your design is. Chapter 3 is about how you create your own research project, or how you create your own innovative questions. The text says that questions are valuable because they force you to confront what you don't know. In other words, the question is an intellectual tool for discovery and innovation. It allows you to formulate and express the unknown. In some sense, a question should liberate you to ask what is forbidden, or what is obscured, or what is censored. The well-known thinker Noam Chomsky talks about a type of question that is not permissible in society. And what he means by that is the questions are not permissible by society and don't get asked because, as intuitively understood, these questions should not be asked. For example, these questions would typically challenge authority, patriotism, spiritual beliefs, norms and status quo, political correctness. What Chomsky calls permissible questions and impermissible questions. Chapter 4 is about the rationalizing and practical stage of focusing on the problem that the audience will think worth solving. Unfortunately, that is a stage that can also kill innovation and innovative thinking unless you can persuade the audience to accept a new perspective. It is about the practicality in chapter 4 of intellectual survival within a field or discipline. But this does not guard against a personal preoccupation or obsession that others don't share. The reality is that communication requires an audience. People criticize the media all the time for neglecting topics that people aren't interested in. If people aren't interested in a topic, it doesn't create the revenue, and thus the project can't be funded, and the journalist can't be paid. It's financial suicide to produce information that doesn't produce revenue. And for the most part, researchers paid to teach in a university are free from the pressure to do research that produces revenue, which therefore sometimes results in innovation, but they aren't free from the pressure to produce the kind of research that is the qualification to be hired in a university. So think of yourself as an employee, and you're in a discipline. It could be tourism, it could be in another discipline, and that discipline has certain questions that it thinks are permissible and other things that it thinks is impermissible. And one question maybe in that discipline it doesn't get asked, and you get asked in an assignment in this course, and the option you had in the last assignment, the question was, is there a market for virtual 3D reality tourism? Is it commercially viable? And is that kind of question allowed? Is that kind of a Netflix question versus a Blockbuster status quo of Blockbuster saying we can just ignore Netflix? People will always buy video in stores. We don't even need to examine alternatives. We don't even need to investigate those kinds of questions. So that's why I say chapter 3 is radical. That it is looking at the engine of innovation as curiosity and asking questions, and it leaves you with the question, what is your inquiry quotient? What I call your IQ. Your ability to be curious, your ability to ask questions, your ability to innovate. Think about that. Are you getting enough out of your mind to ask innovative questions, to go back to that early stage, which some researchers tell us the stage of being like a child and asking questions and never feeling there's a stupid question, never feeling social pressure not to ask a question, never feeling pressured by authorities not ask questions, never feeling pressured by an education system to ask only the permissible questions, not the impermissible question. So think about that. What is your IQ? And do you want to develop your inquiry quotient, your IQ?